I never thought I'd be the one to take down our neighborhood's self-appointed dictator, but sometimes life has a way of serving up the perfect opportunity for justice. It all started on what should have been a peaceful Saturday afternoon in May. I was in my kitchen preparing lunch when I noticed movement through my window. Stepping closer, I saw my front gate standing ajar. Strange, since I'm always careful to keep it latched because of my animals. When I went outside to investigate, I discovered our homeowners association president, Karen Wilkins, leading a group of strangers across my front lawn. And here we have an example of what we're trying to discourage in Oakwood Estates, she was saying, gesturing broadly toward my property with a clipboard clutched in her manicured hand. As you can see, some residents insist on rural-style living despite our community standards. I stood frozen on my porch, watching this woman trespass on my property while disparaging it to complete strangers. The visitors, who I later learned were potential investors in a neighboring development, nodded along as Karen continued her unauthorized tour. She hadn't seen me yet, and I took a moment to collect myself before clearing my throat loudly. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "Is there a reason you've opened my gate and brought visitors onto my private property without permission?" Karen turned, momentarily startled before recovering with a practiced smile. "Oh, hello there. We're just conducting our monthly neighborhood assessment tour. As HOA president, I have the authority to inspect properties for compliance." She said this with such conviction that her guests nodded appreciatively, clearly impressed by her dedication to community standards. "Actually," I replied, "the HOA bylaws specifically state that property inspections require 48 hours written notice, and they certainly don't permit bringing strangers onto private property without the owner's consent." Karen's smile tightened. "Well, perhaps you should familiarize yourself with the updated guidelines. We've made some changes recently." She waved her clipboard as if it contained these mythical new rules. I knew for a fact there had been no updates to our HOA regulations. I'd attended every meeting for the past 3 years. This was the beginning of what would become an escalating campaign of harassment that would ultimately lead to Karen's downfall. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me explain why this matters. I've lived in Oakwood Estates for nearly 7 years. It's a beautiful community of 65 homes nestled against the foothills, with generous lot sizes that attracted me specifically because I wanted space for my small menagerie of rescue animals. My property is fully compliant with both HOA regulations and county zoning laws, which permit small livestock on lots over 1 acre. I've always been a good neighbor, maintaining my property, participating in community events, and respecting others' space and privacy. When I first moved in, the HOA was a reasonable organization focused on maintaining property values through sensible guidelines. That changed 3 years ago when Karen Wilkins was elected president after running unopposed. What began as enthusiastic leadership quickly morphed into something more troubling. Karen seemed to view her position not as a community service but as a license to control her neighbors' lives. Before targeting me, she had already driven 2 families to sell their homes and move away. The Johnsons left after months of harassment over their son's basketball hoop, which Karen claimed violated noise ordinances despite being used only during reasonable daylight hours. The Patels departed after Karen issued weekly violation notices about their garden, claiming their vegetables were inappropriate landscaping despite being fully concealed behind their privacy fence. After that Saturday intrusion, I decided to document everything. I installed security cameras covering my property boundaries and began keeping meticulous records of every interaction with Karen. This would prove invaluable later, but in the moment, it was simply my way of maintaining sanity in the face of her escalating behavior. The following week, I found a violation notice tucked into my mailbox, a practice explicitly forbidden by postal regulations, I might add. The notice claimed my garden gnome collection exceeded the permitted ornamental density for front yards. I couldn't help but laugh because there was no such regulation in our bylaws. I photographed the notice, filed it in my growing folder, and continued about my business. 3 days later, another notice appeared, this one claiming my mailbox was an unapproved shade of forest green. Our actual bylaws permitted any earth tone, and my mailbox had been the same color since I moved in, with approval from the previous HOA board. Again, I documented and ignored it. Karen's campaign intensified. She began parking across from my house, taking photos with her phone while making notes on her ever-present clipboard. When I would wave politely, she would pretend not to see me. Neighbors reported that she was asking questions about my unusual pets and suggesting that I might be violating health codes. What makes this situation particularly frustrating is how Karen manufactured authority where none existed. She created a neighborhood watch committee consisting only of herself and two friends who were equally disconnected from reality. This committee began issuing community alerts about supposed violations throughout the neighborhood, with my property frequently featured as an example of rural decay infiltrating our premium community. By June, the situation had escalated to weekly violation notices, each more absurd than the last. My bird feeder was attracting wildlife. My wind chimes were creating noise pollution. My garden beds were improperly etched. None of these violations existed in our actual bylaws, but Karen delivered each notice with the gravity of a federal indictment. I remained calm through it all, responding with polite emails requesting the specific bylaw citations for each alleged violation. Karen never provided them, instead responding with vague references to community standards and board discretion. I forwarded these exchanges to our HOA's legal counsel, who eventually sent Karen a reminder about proper procedure, but this only seemed to fuel her determination. The breaking point came in early July. I returned home from work to find an official-looking notice taped to my front door. Unlike the previous handwritten citations, this one was printed on what appeared to be county letterhead, though I would later learn it was a poorly disguised forgery. The notice claimed that an anonymous complaint had been filed regarding illegal livestock on my property and that I had 72 hours to remove all non-domestic animals or face daily fines. I was stunned. My animals, 2 rescue goats, a miniature donkey, and 4 chickens, were all legally permitted under county zoning regulations for my property size. I had all the necessary permits and had maintained impeccable care standards. The animals were beloved by neighborhood children, who often stopped by with their parents to visit. That evening, as I was calling the county office to verify the notice, I received a text from my neighbor Elaine. "Did you know Karen is telling everyone your animals are dangerous and disease-ridden? She's at the Miller's dinner party right now talking about calling animal control." This was no longer just harassment. It was defamation that could potentially result in my animals being seized. I needed to act, but I wanted to be strategic. You see, what Karen didn't know was that I wasn't just an animal lover with a few pets. I'm actually a certified wildlife rehabilitation specialist who works with the county's animal welfare department. Many of the officials who would respond to complaints like Karen's were people I had trained or worked with over the years. The next morning, I called my colleague Marcus at Animal Control to give him a heads up about the situation. He was familiar with my property and confirmed that all my permits were in order. "Don't worry," he assured me. "If we get a complaint, I'll handle it personally." Sure enough, that afternoon, Marcus called to let me know that Karen had indeed filed a complaint, claiming my property was an unlicensed zoo harboring exotic and dangerous animals. He had explained to her that my animals were all properly permitted, but she had insisted on an inspection. "She doesn't know you work with us, does she?" Marcus asked, amusement in his voice. "No," I replied, "and I'd like to keep it that way for now." We arranged for Marcus to conduct an official inspection the following day, and I asked him to please treat it as a standard response without revealing our professional connection. He agreed, understanding my desire to handle the situation diplomatically. What happened next was better than anything I could have orchestrated. Karen, apparently not trusting that Animal Control would take her complaint seriously, decided to escalate matters by contacting local media. She reached out to a community news program that featured a weekly neighborhood issues segment, claiming to have uncovered a dangerous animal hoarding situation that authorities were ignoring. The producer, intrigued by the story but professional enough to seek balance, contacted me for comment. I explained the situation calmly, provided copies of my permits, and invited them to attend the scheduled inspection the following day. I also mentioned that I'd be happy to educate viewers about proper small-scale urban farming and animal rescue work. The news crew arrived just before Marcus, and Karen appeared minutes later, clearly expecting to be the star of an exposé. She had brought along 2 members of her committee, all 3 wearing matching neighborhood safety patrol shirts that I'd never seen before. As cameras rolled, Karen launched into her prepared statement about neighborhood standards and health concerns. She was in the middle of describing the terrible odors and noises from my property, neither of which existed, when Marcus arrived in his official vehicle. "Good morning," he said, approaching our group with his clipboard. "I'm here to conduct an inspection following a complaint about livestock at this address." Karen practically glowed with vindication. "Yes, that was my complaint. As HOA president, it's my responsibility to ensure community safety." Marcus nodded professionally and turned to me. "May I see your permits, please?" I retrieved my neatly organized folder and handed it over. Marcus reviewed the documents, making notes on his clipboard. Everything appears to be in order. Your permits are current, and your property exceeds the minimum acreage requirements. Let's take a look at the animals and their housing. As we walked toward the barn, Karen interjected, "But what about the exotic animals?" The complaint mentioned exotic species. Marcus looked confused. The complaint specified 2 goats, a donkey, and chickens. Those aren't exotic species. Well, there must be others she's hiding, Karen insisted. What about the monkeys? Monkeys? Marcus and I said simultaneously. Yes, several neighbors have reported seeing monkeys, Karen stated firmly. At this point, the news reporter, who had been filming our exchange, asked, "Could we see these reported monkeys?" Karen pointed vaguely toward my barn. "They're probably hidden inside. That's why we need a thorough inspection." Marcus conducted his inspection with the news crew following along. My animals were all in excellent health, their living areas clean and well-maintained. The reporters seemed increasingly skeptical of Karen's claims, especially when the dangerous exotic animals turned out to be 2 elderly goats named Mabel and Daisy who spent most of their time napping in the sun. As we completed the tour, Marcus handed me an inspection report marked "Fully Compliant" in bold letters. "Your facility meets all county requirements," he said officially. Then, with a slight smile that only I would recognize, he added, "In fact, this property could serve as a model for proper small-scale livestock management." The reporter turned to Karen. "So it appears there are no violations here. Would you like to comment on that?" Karen's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Well, the HOA has stricter standards than the county. Our bylaws clearly state." Actually, I interjected gently, "Our bylaws specifically permit small livestock on properties over 1 acre, which mine is." I have the relevant section right here. I produced another document from my folder. The reporter, clearly sensing a different story than the one Karen had promised, asked, "Ms. Wilkins, did you review the HOA bylaws before filing this complaint?" Karen's composure cracked. "I don't need to review anything. I wrote most of those rules myself." This was a revealing lie. Our bylaws had been established years before Karen moved to the neighborhood. The reporter raised an eyebrow and made a note. Marcus, maintaining his professional demeanor, turned to Karen. "Ma'am, filing false reports with animal control is a serious matter. It diverts resources from legitimate cases of animal neglect or abuse." "I didn't file a false report," Karen snapped. "I reported what neighbors told me." "Which neighbors?" the reporter asked. Karen gestured vaguely toward the surrounding homes. "Many people have complained. They're just afraid to come forward." At that moment, as if on cue, my neighbor Elaine appeared at her fence. "Everything okay over there?" I saw the animal control truck and got worried about the animals. The reporter called over to her. "Ma'am, have you ever had concerns about the animals on this property?" Elaine looked confused. "Concerns? No, those animals are better cared for than most people I know. My grandkids love visiting them." One by one, other neighbors appeared, drawn by the commotion. Each expressed surprise at the inspection and affirmed that my animals had never been a problem. Several mentioned that Karen had told them various concerning stories about my property, none of which they had personally observed. As the truth unraveled on camera, Karen's indignation turned to panic. She attempted to end the interview, but the damage was done. The reporter now had a very different story, one about an HOA president potentially abusing her position and filing false reports to harass a neighbor. The segment aired 3 days later. It was titled HOA Overreach, When Community Leadership Goes Too Far, and it featured interviews with several neighbors who shared their own experiences with Karen's manufactured violations. The county animal welfare director appeared briefly to confirm that my property was fully compliant and to caution against misusing government resources for neighborhood disputes. The fallout was swift. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, where Karen faced dozens of residents sharing similar stories of harassment. Documents were presented showing that Karen had been issuing violation notices without board approval and had even collected unauthorized fines from several elderly residents who didn't know they could contest them. By the end of that meeting, Karen was removed from her position pending a formal vote. The board issued a public apology to affected residents, including me, and began a review of all outstanding violation notices. The Neighborhood Safety Patrol was immediately disbanded. But the consequences didn't end there. The county prosecutor's office contacted me about pressing charges for the falsified county document Karen had posted on my door. The investigation revealed that she had used county letterhead taken from her workplace. She was an administrative assistant in an unrelated department, which constituted misuse of government property. Karen ultimately faced misdemeanor charges for filing a false report and forging government documents. She accepted a plea deal that included community service, ironically at the county animal shelter, and was placed on probation for 1 year. As for me, I chose not to pursue civil action, feeling that justice had been adequately served. In the months that followed, our community began healing. The new HOA board, led by my neighbor Elaine, focused on bringing residents together rather than policing minor differences. We established a community garden where children could learn about growing food and caring for animals. My illegal livestock became neighborhood celebrities, with Mabel and Daisy the goats making an appearance at our fall festival. Karen eventually sold her house and moved away, unable to face her neighbors after the truth came to light. I sometimes wonder if she's learned anything from the experience or if she's simply found a new community to manage. I hope for her sake and for her new neighbors that she's gained some perspective. What I learned from this ordeal is that standing firm against bullies, even those who cloak themselves in authority, is sometimes necessary to protect not just yourself but your entire community. By documenting everything, knowing my rights, and responding with calm determination rather than matching Karen's aggression, I was able to expose the truth in a way that couldn't be dismissed. On quiet evenings now, I often sit on my back porch watching Mabel and Daisy graze peacefully as the sun sets over our neighborhood. The wind chimes that Karen once cited as noise pollution tinkle gently in the breeze, and I feel a profound gratitude for the community that ultimately came together to stand against tyranny and reclaim our shared spaces. Sometimes justice arrives in unexpected ways, but when it does, it restores not just your own peace but the harmony of an entire community. Total_char_count, 27,289.